guys. Thanks for having me out. First of all, is my microphone working? Check. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the first thing I'm supposed to. I don't see it. Okay, I see a couple of thumbs up out there. Well, I was on the way in with Stephen Dale, and by the way, Stephen Dale's my tech guy. He's like the very, very best. If you guys run into a problem up here, he works for NBC and he knows his stuff. And I ran into Lloyd coming in, and he asked what you're going to speak on, and I get 3 or 4 questions. Is Scare speaking on Luke again? Well, it's all I know. I don't have anything else. I'm a one-shot guy. Now, it was. Let's see. Is France? Let's see. This is September. They should be 6 hours ahead of us. Is that right?
Yep.
They're 6 hours. That means that 98 years and 22 minutes ago, Frank Luke was standing beside Braden Creek, collapsing, dying in a story that we all know very well. And so, in some senses, well, what are you going to tell? I mean, we've got the story all figured out now. Well, there's nothing new to be told. There's a couple of things I'd like to kind of throw at you over the next few minutes. First of all, we've got some new animation. If you watched the DVD documentary, The Search for the Stand, came out a few years ago, some stuff hit the cutting room floor. That's of necessity. So that'll be shown here for the first time. Got a few new details as to the story that if you're sitting there, if you've read The Stand and you're thinking, I'm not sure if that was in, well, it probably wasn't. So is it nothing massive? You don't have to scoot to the very edge of your seat. But there's some fun new stuff in here that I think you'll enjoy. And
You're going to put it in print?
Eventually. Okay. Yeah. But see, you get it first, though. You.
Yeah. I hear you.
Whenever we're talking about, well, I'm going to research this and I'm going to prove this. Remember, it's a very wise saying that I did not originate, but I'm going to blatantly plagiarize. Proof is only proof if the other party accepts it. You can tell them truth all day long, but it's not proof to them until they reach the point where they say, you know what, this guy's probably right. And so what I'd like to do is introduce to you a few new things that got edited out of The Stand and so forth. And remember, nobody in World War I aviation is talking about proof. The fact of the matter is, none of us even ever knew if a guy named Frank Luke ever existed. But we have collectively decided that the evidence is overwhelming enough to be in the 99.999 percentile that, okay, we're going to run with this. So what you're dealing with is probabilities. And when you run through probabilities in different scenarios, a lot of times you can find truth in some unexpected places. So hopefully that'll be enjoyable. And we'll start with some things that we already know and figure out how we know these things that we think we know, and draw some conclusions from it, a few of which will be new. What we do know is, and also I want to take a look at this from multiple perspectives. We're going to take a look at the first thing that any of us ever read on Frank Luke was Hall's work, The Balloon Buster, Norman Hall.
Yep.
He got most of the story right, but he told it from the French perspective. The French perspective was, well, we saw an airplane, he was followed by a bunch of Germans, and he shot down 3 of them, and then he comes roaring over here, gets shot, and he goes down and dies. The basics of that story turned out to be absolutely true, but they got some of their facts mixed up. And once you stand on the ground in Murvaux and look over the field, and you see the landscape, you see the Côte Saint-Germain looming to the north, all of a sudden it comes alive, and you think, they made some mistakes, but I see why now. And hopefully some of that will come into focus as we go on. Now, let's look at some things that we know. We know that Luke took off from the Verdun airfield, and, oh my gosh, where is my pointer? Voila! We know that he took off from Verdun airfield. Verdun is 21 miles north of Rimbercourt. We'll talk about that in a few moments. The spacing between those airfields actually matters in this story. And we absolutely know that 1756 hours is when Luke took off. And we're dealing with all Allied time, which was different most of the year, but it was the same for just a few weeks. You guys know more about that than I do. But we're dealing on all Allied time for simplicity's sake. Now, how do we know that Luke left at exactly 1756 hours? Because this guy told us, Major Harold Hartney, the commander of the 1st Pursuit Group, which included the 27th Aero Squadron, of which Frank Luke was a member. Now, he said so very specifically in his memoirs entitled Up and Atom by Harold Hartney. This beautiful scan, by the way, is one of the earliest editions of the book. which I may or may not have blatantly stolen off the photo bucket page of Greg Van Weingarten. Be that as it may, that's a cool picture. Now, 1756 was the hour that he left, and Luke went north. He flew directly north to a small town called Avocore. It was not a random flight. Avocore was the home base of the U.S. 7th Balloon Company. The 7th Balloon Company had commanding officers and observers with whom Luke was very familiar. He had known them, and actually, this was September 29th, 1918, the date of his death. He had known these guys for going on 3 months and became very well acquainted with them. And he flew over Avocore, and he had made a handwritten note. He put it in a metal canister, he attached the streamer, and he dropped it out over the U.S. 7th Balloon Company as he went through. How do we know? Well, we know because Captain Mark Logan told us so. Now, the original records for the 7th Balloon Company, as well as the 5th and a couple of others, were lost in a fire in, I think, late 1918. In fact, this is my tellus. At any rate, Captain Mark Logan was consulted in the Air Force's investigation into the disappearance of Frank Luke, which at this point was a disappearance. Nobody had found him yet. And that's how we know. Now, I'm going to ask you to keep track of 3 people. Hopefully that's not too much of a task to do so without pencil and paper. We don't have to keep track of a whole squadron or even a whole flight, but I need you to keep track of 3 people who are going to tell this story. First is obviously Frank Luke. Secondly, members of the 95th Aero Squadron would be Lansing Holden and Granville Woodard. Woodard was very, very close friends with Frank Luke. Now, Luke's relationship with Joseph Wiener is very well known. It's been written about many times over. But he had other friends, believe it or not. Most of them were not with the officer corps of the 27th Aero Squadron, which despised him like nobody's business. But he did have some good friends. He had to go outside the squadron to find them, because once Luke cornered you, he would talk you to death. He could empty your room in minutes. But Granville Woodard was actually a very, very dear friend. Now, this is Murvaux Airfield, as seen in, let's see, the summer of 1918. I think that is from Thomas Lennon's album, actually. He was a member of the 27th. So that means it was early September of 1918. And here's how it looks today. Nothing has changed except those hideous, ugly wind farm things they put all over France. Other than that, that is the windiest field in world history. There's nothing there to see, and if you were to take the camera and spin in all directions, it's pretty much the same. That's how it looks today, and Murvaux is 21 miles to the south of Verdun. Now, down south at Murvaux, this field, that's where the entire 1st Pursuit Group was stationed. It was a monstrous field. Rickenbacker and Luke actually had to speak by phone. They were pretty good friends too, but it was just so big he didn't want to walk it all the time. Now, you go 21 miles north of that, and that's the Verdun field. Now, without getting in too deep, suffice to say for the moment that Luke had spent the previous night at Verdun, and he took off from Verdun. He did not take off at the same place as Granville, Woodard, and Lansing Holden. They took off from the field at Murvaux. Now, whenever they went north, they actually crossed each other's paths. Luke went north to Avocore, dropped his famous note, hung a right, turned east, and had a specific plan in mind that he wanted to execute. So he is flying due east. Meanwhile, Holden and Woodard are flying due north. And if you do the math, at a cruising speed of 90 miles an hour, and yes, the SPAD would go 125 or 130, and yes, it would go so. You guys know that better than I do. I'm not a tech guy on airplanes. But 90 miles an hour is a pretty good average cruising speed at the level these guys were cruising. So if you do the math, what you find out is something pretty amazing. As Luke was heading east at 1,500 feet, which was his assigned patrol starting altitude, Woodard and Holden were headed north in 2 more SPADs, and they were at 6,000 feet, all the way up against that cloud bank, which becomes very important later in the story. So they had to be there at just within moments of each other. And we'll never know if they saw each other. because Luke didn't live. And in fact, it's, it's almost assured that they didn't, because Woodard lived, he said nothing. Holden got back that same night, he said nothing. And if you take a look at this, we're going to come back to this several times. This black line is the flight path of Frank Luke. The white dotted line is the flight path of Granville, Woodard, and Lansing Holden. Right here is the animation that we just saw. As Luke is heading east past C1 and D1, Holden and Woodard are headed northbound. Luke's idea was to come over here, pick up at C2, hang north, and I'll tell you this, here's something, in fact, here's another new piece of information. The 27th Aero Squadron had been notified 4 days before Frank Luke's death. That would be September 25th. On September 25th, late in the morning, Luke returned from an abbreviated leave in Paris. He was back before dinner at the Rimbercourt Airfield, and all of the pilots of the 1st Pursuit Group, and specifically the 27th, were told of, coincidentally, it's the same number, it's not a misprint, 27 specific balloon locations on their area of the Meuse-Argonne front that they were responsible for knowing, and they were asked to go out and look for them during the course of their standard patrols, come back, bring that information, and put it onto the intelligence maps, which are now at the National Archives, which were consulted for the stand. So, Luke wants to head over here and pick up, and let's see, Grammy, Azani Sumazan, John, just feel free, I know you're going there. Just kidding, brother. As you head north, he wanted to pick up BZ-115. That was a known site of a balloon. Grammy, am I close, John? Okay.
Close enough.
All right, thank you. And then Azane Sumazan had BZ-95, and here's the plan. Here's what he wants to do. He wants to roll up the German balloon line in front of him. Now you're saying that's a terrible plan. Yeah, it is. He was up alone, but there's a big backstory behind that we won't get into. Suffice to say for the moment that he turns north and heads up toward BZ-115. Now, BZ-115 at Grammy is shot at, and the reports for the evening, we have several sources. We have, first of all, Prussian 5th Army intelligence sources that were released twice per day. We have the FLA sources and the COFL reports. The first balloon was shot to pieces, but it didn't explode. It was safely hauled back to the ground. The second balloon at Azane Sumazan was flamed, and there are reports in German records indicating that it was flamed, so there's no question. So we know that. Now, Luke's going to continue flying north. But here's the problem. He's his own worst enemy in a sense. He's lost the element of surprise. It's a very gray afternoon. It's been raining constantly for 2 days. It's 6 o'clock in the evening going on 7 o'clock, and visibility is very poor. So when you light up a balloon, like the 4th of July, a BZ-95, after 3 separate attacks that he made on it, everybody and his brother for 15 miles in every direction sees it. Now, at Romagna and Danvia, they had no intention of just sitting there and letting Luke become the victor over their balloon as well. So Luke goes on past Romagna, and BZ-121 was stationed at Romagna, and they see the action, they haul it down in advance before he gets there, and he sees another balloon off on his right side. That's the Austrian balloon KUK-13. It was, records show it was never even in the air that evening, so Luke couldn't have seen that at all. So now he expects to see 2 more balloons, doesn't see either of them, and now BZ-109 is seen in the distance as well, and it's hauled down before he can arrive. So what Luke expects to see and what he actually runs into are 2 entirely different things. It's kind of like driving down your favorite road, but they've torn down 2 buildings over here, and the Dairy Queen shut down last week, and you think, now wait a second. I thought we were supposed, I'm sure I know where I'm at. And that's the situation that Luke was running into. Now, let's go back and see what was happening at this exact same moment 12 miles to the west with Lansing, Holden, and Granville Woodard. They were last seen crossing Luke at 6,000 feet, all the way up against cloud cover, headed north toward Consenvoid, which at this point in time was behind German lines. Now, once they reached the lines, both reports from Woodard and Holden specify they no longer were flying straight. They were flying great, big, lazy circles and headed north slowly with that series of circles, chewing up a lot of time. They were verifying and validating the 27 balloon locations they were told to look for. They were on a voluntary patrol headed almost due north and slightly west toward Consenvoy when a funny and awkward thing happened. North of Consenvoy, they are followed by Yasta 19. There were either 4, 5, or 6 airplanes. Maybe Greg or John or somebody can specify on that. But all of a sudden, Lansing Holden turns around and he thinks, oh my gosh, we're being followed. And we're way outnumbered and we're behind German lines. He does the obvious. He flies up into the clouds. And he later wrote home to his family that same night after he got back. He said, I hope Woody saw them too, Granville Woodard. Woody didn't see them. He had no idea that they were there. He continues on, looks over to his left, and, well, Holden's going. Guess I'll run into him later. And his idea was to continue on to a place called Briere's Farm. Now, again, let's try to look at this through the eyes of the participants and see what they saw. Just ahead of Granville Woodard, Holden's up in the clouds, Yasta 19 is behind him, and just ahead of Granville Woodard, he sees what they've been looking for the last 45 minutes or an hour. Behold, there's Briere's Farm, and there were 2 balloons here, a northern balloon ascension point and a southern balloon ascension point. That is BZ-64's home base. Every balloon Zug in the German units, they had 2 balloons, a primary and a backup, and if they had enough hydrogen, which was not a given in September of 1918, they would frequently fly them both, and they would be in very close proximity. That's what BZ-64 was doing on this particular night. So what does Lansing Holden, or rather, Lansing's in the clouds. We got to come back to Granville. What does Granville Woodard do? Well, they came out to shoot balloons, so he's going to go shoot them. He chooses the northern of the 2 balloons. He fires at it, and the animation is just a touch out of sequence here. They did an incredible job on this animation, by the way. In fact, I'll pause here and tell you something. You guys remember the History Channel series called Dogfights? Yeah. And they have all these animations. We hired the same guys to do this because they're just phenomenal. I mean, I can't take credit for any of this. They're amazing. One thing that was slightly out of sequence, though, you see Granville Woodard turning away with the Yasta 19 coming after him. The balloon did not burn. It smoldered, but it did not burn until Woodard had turned south and was now fighting for his own life, and the balloon was the last thing on his mind. So the northern balloon goes down, and here's how this place looks today. If you go out there, you can still see Briere's Farm. It's there. If you decide that you want to knock on the door, don't. The guy's not very friendly. But hey, his farm's cool. And we found BZ Northern Ascension Point right here, and the Southern Ascension Point is right here. And how do we know? Well, we had the photographic proof from Spot 23 that we looked at just in the previous slide that was up here a couple of minutes ago. But I love to do the then and now photos. I had to climb up on top of a church roof to be able to take this. No other place to get it, really. So now where are we at? We've got Frank Luke going north, 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 north. By golly, where'd all the balloons go? Well, they were shot down. They saw him coming, and they were hiding. So he ends up north of Brandevie, and he thinks something is seriously wrong. I've lost track somewhere. And all of a sudden, off his left wing, what does he see? He sees Granville Woodard blow up BZ-64's northern balloon. Now, how does that look from about 2 to 3 clicks away against the night sky? Boom. Aha! Now I know where we're going. So at this point, Luke has a choice. The black square here represents a very large landmark in this area of France called the Côte Saint-Germain. It's not just a mountain. It's over 1,000 feet high, but it's also more like 2 kilometers long. And actually, that dark green U-shaped thing right there is the true Côte Saint-Germain. Don't you love Google Earth? And so Luke decides, he's out there to shoot down balloons too, and he's finally found where they're at. So he hangs a left, and he's got a choice here. Does he want to go the most direct route and go right over the Côte Saint-Germain? Well, probably not. Actually, as young a kid as he was, Luke was an old hand by now at shooting down balloons, and he knew what the element of surprise meant. It would have been a lot better off to fly around the Côte Saint-Germain and come in from the north, rather than to climb up and have to go well over 1,000 to maybe 2,000 feet high to clear the Côte Saint-Germain and basically announce to everybody at BZ-35 and any other balloon within 20 miles that he's there. So he decides to fly around the north instead to preserve surprise. So now we have the Côte Saint-Germain right here. Luke's flight path takes him around, and as soon as he comes around, he's actually got his eyes on the Breers Farm area. But as soon as he comes around, what does he see? He sees Balloon Zug 35. Now, let's go back to Granville Woodard and just finish his story very briefly, because it doesn't turn out very well. Greg, how many kills did Rudolph Reinau end up with? Somebody know? A bunch.
6, wasn't it?
Yeah, he had a pretty decent score. And Rudolph Reinau was essentially ultimately credited with shooting down the SPAD of Granville Woodard. Woodard is severely injured, takes a number of bullets. His plane does flip just like they had in the animation here, and he doesn't even make it back as far as convoy. He is taken prisoner, and a lot of what we know from this night comes from the prisoner of war report that all repatriated soldiers were required to fill out. So this was just hugely helpful. Thank goodness he lived, not for his sake, but for our selfish purposes. That is essentially the end of his story. So now we're down to 2 guys, okay? Now here's where we get to a really interesting point. And it takes, we'll spend 45 minutes or 50 minutes talking about it in this presentation. But from this point in Luke's flight path to where he arrived over Murvaux and what happened over the next few moments, I mean, this is a matter of moments that we're talking about. This all happened very quickly. Luke is coming south on BZ-35, and he sees it right in front of him. Holy cow, it actually worked. I found the balloon line again. He flies toward it. We know that the northern balloon at BZ-64, Breers Farm, has already been taken out, probably smoke still in the sky. So put this in your head. When Lansing Holden spends just a few seconds up in the clouds trying to get away from Yasta 19, and he thinks, I think we're okay now. Let's go take a look. What does Lansing Holden see? Let's look at it from his point of view. He comes out of the clouds, and right in front of him is one smoldering remains of the BZ-64 northern balloon. But what does he see as he's headed northbound? He actually reports this later in the evening. He puts in his report that surely it had to be Granville Woodard who shot down the balloon that I saw go up in flames off my right wing. That is in his report for that night. But you know what? It wasn't Granville Woodard. Granville Woodard, by this time, had already been shot down and was laying with a broken back and all kinds of bullet holes in him about 10 miles to the south, and Yasta 19 flying circles around him, actually taking pot shots at him while he was trying to crawl out of what was left of his SPAD. So Lansing Holden sees BZ-35 go down, and then he decides he's going to go after the southernmost balloon at Breers Farm of BZ-64. He hits it, he knocks it down, it blows up in a huge ball of fire, and Lansing Holden is the only one of our 3 boys to make it home that night. Now let's take a look in just a few moments. Put this area in your head if you would. What we're going to do is go to another map that zooms in to this area right here so that we can better track the last few moments of Luke's life. But before we do that, before we change perspectives, I want to back up in time just maybe 60 to 90 seconds. And let's back up in time to the moment where Luke makes his attack on BZ-35. Now, here's where we're at, and we'll reference this map a few times. Luke is coming southbound around the west tip of the Côte Saint-Germain. Less than 200 meters off the west tip was the location of BZ-35, and that's where the attack begins. And he pretty much achieved a complete surprise over BZ-35, who's completely caught with her pants down. Why? Wasn't their fault. Everybody was looking west toward Breers Farm. Everybody within a 20-mile radius, all the way down to the United States 2nd and 7th balloon companies reported it. That's where everybody's eyes were at. There were no other balloon attacks taking place on the Mazargon front. Now, here's a really cool discovery that I got to tell you about, and I didn't discover it, so I can brag all over it. A guy named Volker Nemsch is a good friend of mine. Some of you guys probably know him. He's in Germany, and he helped me out with a lot of research. Now, BZ-35 was commanded by an officer named Lieutenant Bernhard Mongels. And this goes all the way back to Norman Hall's The Balloon Buster. Mongels' name is fairly well known. Mongels' family told me during the writing of the stand, they had lost all the papers. He had a really detailed diary that was all lost. He lost all of his records. He also kept a lot of the maps that were used by BZ-35. Man, would that have been gold? Well, it was lost in a fire. But the one thing that was not lost were his photos. The family thought they were gone. But thank goodness, Volker comes to the rescue, and he's poking around a small museum in Westphalen, Germany, and he comes across these huge albums that are labeled Mongols. I'm like, are you serious? I mean, what are the odds of that? So he starts looking, and sure enough, Bernhard Mongels turns out to have been quite the photographer. There's like 4 volumes that thick. The guy took hundreds of photos, and every one of them survived the war, many with notations on the back. So we just hit a gold mine, and thankfully, this did come out just in time to make it into the book, but I had to tell you this little extra bit. We don't have to wonder what defenses Luke ran into whenever he shot down BZ-35. We don't even have to kind of look up stock shots and say, well, we're sure it was a machine gun just like this. We've got the photos. These are from Mongels' own album. Now, if you're not familiar with the balloon Zooks, and I know a lot of you guys are, they generally did not get a stock set of anti-aircraft guns. They pretty much had whatever they could dig up, capture, steal, or acquire by any means possible. And according to Mongels, they had that top left machine gun. That is a Danish Madsen machine gun. You guys can identify these better than I can. These are not kind of sort of like these are the machine guns that shot at Frank Luke on September 29th, 1918 in Murvaux, France. This is kind of an amazing discovery. I mean, what are the odds of that? And then, of course, they had the MFLAC 216, which is one of a family of guns that we've all read about our whole lives that were invariably referred to as flaming onions for reasons that I still fail to understand. I guess it's the way the shot traveled through the air and kind of had this funny look to it. But that actually is the MFLAC 216 gun used by BZ-35. So I thought that was kind of cool. Now, when Luke attacks BZ-35, now we know exactly who was shooting what at it. He would have been headed south, and the guys with the Dogfight series did a magnificent job of replicating the landscape, roughly where the forestation was and was not, what areas were clear and were not. They even got it right that Granville Woodard has already downed the northern balloon off to the west by about 2 clicks, and the southern one would go down just seconds later under the guns of Lansing Holden. So they did a magnificent job with that. And even one thing they helped us a lot with was, if you see the silhouette, the horizon, they must have got that off Google Earth or something. I don't know how they did it, but they got it right. So when Luke flies away from BZ-35, shoots it down, he's headed south, going back toward American lines. For some reason, and we don't know, I can only speculate that he was looking for a major road that he could check his maps on. Because I have no other reason to believe this. There's sometimes instead of proving something, you prove everything else wrong and then use whatever's left, you know? And you think that must have been it. Well, he turns left and heads down the D102. The D102 is this road right here. It is the only road in and out. It was then and remains today the only through road through the village of Murvaux. Knocks down BZ-35, comes down here. By gosh, where am I? There's a road, and it's a big one. It must be on the map. Let's see where it goes. He flies over Murvaux a couple of times, and here is where I want to go to the French version. Here is where we can really open our eyes and try to see this as the French people on the ground saw it that night, and it'll explain a lot. The French claim to have seen 1 Allied airplane, not 2, not 3, 1. They claim that it was followed by a full squadron of Germans. They claim that it dove down sharply and suddenly, that it flamed 3 balloons. And they were absolutely convinced that that had to be Frank Luke. Well, why? Well, let's take a look at what they would have seen. Again, this is using the dogfights guys' work, and you're standing at the western edge of Murvaux, and when you look west, what do you see? You don't see 3 planes, you don't even see 2, because Holden went up in the clouds. You had 1 airplane flown by Granville Woodard and followed by either 4, 5, or 6, depending on whose count you accept, Fokker D7s from Yasta 19. Now, the French claimed that 1 guy dove steeply to attack a balloon, and if you look at it from their standpoint, this is exactly what they would have seen. A speck off in the distance, flying down toward the balloons at Brier's farm. Granville Woodard shoots, and lo and behold, diving right out after him is Yasta 19. Again, even the hills that you see here are roughly correct and accurate because they did such a good job, and it just does a great job putting us seeing what they would have seen. Now, if you're at the edge of the village of Murvaux, you've already seen 1 balloon go down. Just seconds after that, what's the next thing they would have seen after the first airplane disappeared over the horizon here and they lost track of him somewhere? Well, by golly, here he comes again. They assumed it was the same guy. It wasn't. That was Frank Luke knocking down BZ-35 at the west end of the Côte Saint-Germain. And then after that, that remaining balloon right there was very quickly shot down just moments after by Lansing Holden. So when Luke appears over Murvaux with the anti-aircraft guns still firing at him, here's what they see. They don't see 3, they don't see 2, they see 1 guy. Lansing Holden flew off to the east, or rather the west, and was going out of sight. Granville Woodard never came back up off the ground. He was lost in the ground mist. They couldn't see him. They saw 1 guy, Frank Luke, and they assumed that he had shot down all 3 planes single-handedly, when in fact he hadn't. Now, he circles over the village a couple of times, and you'll notice, see these shots going over the head of Frank Luke? Most of them went overhead. In fact, we're going to talk about that. When are we going to talk about that? Let's consult my notes and find out. We'll talk about it later. Right now, we're going to talk about what Auguste Cuny and Gabriel Didier would have seen. Now, we know of 16, specifically 16 human beings in Murvaux who saw Frank Luke's final battle and the entire air battle that we're talking about right now. Now, 2 of them, one thing I wanted to do in the book was try to at least establish that these guys could have seen something. I mean, if they're sitting in their kitchen and it has no windows and they claim to have seen it, well, there's a problem. You know, we have to at least know something about who these people were and where they were. Well, Cuny and Didier were at the west end of town, and they claim to have seen Luke's landing site and all the action that took place here, then the action at Brier's farm over here. They claim to have seen it all, and they were at the western end of town. Now, they were neighbors. Those houses still stand today, and they watched all 3 balloons burn. On the west end of town, there is a wash house. This is a real clue for us. In fact, let's go back 1 slide. That is the wash house right there. Now, this was, we have to back up a couple of years because you never get the exact photo you want, but you're close. This is late 1916. There's the wash house. There were 2 wash houses in Murvaux. One still stands. The one on the other end of town has been torn down. This one still exists to this day. See the church steeple right here? 3 German soldiers standing in front of this roof in this building. Take a look at this because I have such a thing for then and now photos. Is that cool or what? I took that. There's the church steeple again. Here's the same building, the same gutter, same lattice work. And this lighter colored roof, that is the wash house. Some crass person named Serge Palan, who's the mayor of the village, decided he wanted to build a home there, so now you can't see it as well as you could have. Actually, he's a super cool guy. But that's what the then and now looks like. And Gabriel Didier and Auguste Cuny ran from about right here where that purple tree is at, and they ran exactly 73 yards. Now, both of them were in their early 20s, and that's maybe a 10-second run. And when they arrive there, what do they see? The whole view of everything that happened opens up before them. BZ-35, right here. Brier's farm, just beyond this hill, right here. Luke's landing site, Luke's death site. Everything is right in front of them. They were working in a garden in front of the DDA's house. Now, the Germans had taken over all production, all the fields that you see right now, they're farmed to this day. The French didn't get any of that anymore. What they grew were whatever flowers and vegetables they could put out in front of their own little yard, and that's what they could have. They couldn't have anything else. So they were working in front of the DDA's house near the west end of town. They heard machine guns, and like everybody else, they wanted to see what was going on. Typical 21-year-old guys, they ran to the end of town as fast as they could to watch the action. How do we know? Because I went there and I asked them. That's Monsieur Jacquemin. Monsieur Jacquemin, super nice guy, standing to my right there. And he is married to Monique Didier Jacquemin. And her father was Gabriel Didier, one of the two men that ran to the edge of town. Well, how does she know? Well, she heard the same story from her dad their whole life. Me and my buddy were out here working. Well, why? Because it's the only food we could get. It's paved over right now, but this little patch of grass all the way over here, they were actually standing about 10 paces, according to Monique, she told me they were 10 paces in front of the green door. So, I don't know, I can't do any better than that. I thought that was pretty good evidence. This is their home today, and they're just wonderful people, and it gave us a real insight into where at least a few of the people were, so that we know whether or not we can accept their testimony. So, another thing that we found out was that there was at least one M-flak gun on the hill south of Murvaux. And this is where we talk a little bit about the shots going over Luke's head. As he's approaching the village, the guns open up on him. And remember, both the hill to the south of town and the Côte Saint-Germain that you see there to the north of town looming up in the distance, both of these are over 1,000 feet high, so they're pretty good sized hills. And Luke was all the way down on the deck. Well, there's kind of a funny characteristic of the M-flak 216. The barrel won't depress more than -2.5 to 3 degrees. It won't go down any farther. Well, they were set up to shoot for potential bombers and recon planes, and they were 500, 600, 700 feet up the side of the hill. So Luke's buzzing around underneath them, and all these shells are going flying over his head. Now, again, how do we know? Well, the French said so in 1919. They said, hey, all the shells are flying over the guy's head. Well, how are we sure? Because they said so again in 1962. In fact, in 1962, Gabriel Didier and Auguste Cuny were still alive and gave a more clear repetition of what they had said in 1919. So here is where we run into a little bit of a mystery. At least 3 original contemporary sources claim, and you guys have all read this before, and some of those sources made it into Norman Hall's The Balloon Buster. They all say that Luke made a strafing run and killed a number of Germans as he was in town. Well, the details vary. You know, one says he fired at German troops along the main road, that's today's D-102, and killed 12 of them. Another source, and these are contemporary sources to Frank Luke, another says that he fired on them at a nearby homestead just to the west of town called La Maisonnette. The ruins are still there today. Well, all I said in the stand was that he did not fire at troops on the D-102 as he entered into town by the church. That's the most famous story, the one everybody always thought must have been true. But the only way I could say that was because it was the Prussian 7th Reserve Infantry and their artillery attachment that was in Murvaux at that time. They had been there for either 6 or 7 days. I'd have to look it up. They had been there for a few days, and the town was full. I mean chock full. And nobody else was coming or going. That much we know. So I know that didn't happen because there's not going to be a massive body of troops in a dead-end town that you can't get out of that's already full of people. So Murvaux was specifically set up as a resting point. They were already there. So the likelihood of that happening, and again, we're dealing in probabilities here, but it's extremely low. So that's all I said in the stand. I didn't know what else to say. I didn't have anything else. If I could have found any information that would have corroborated any one of these 3 stories that we have about Luke making a strafing, I'd have printed it. But I couldn't find anything. You ever had one of those head-smacking moments after you write? Oh, you guys are authors too. You think, why didn't I see that? That was so dumb. Well, I had one of those. There is a letter from Frederick Zinn to Frank Luke Sr. After Luke's death, his father, Frank Luke Sr., spent actually a considerable amount of time researching and investigating the circumstances of his son's death. Well, he wrote a letter to the Air Service, and a guy named Frederick W. Zinn, who had served in the French Foreign Legion, was very fluent in French and presumably extremely knowledgeable. He was in Murvaux, on site, doing personal investigation into this. And lo and behold, he gets a letter back from Frederick Zinn at the Luke's house in Phoenix, Arizona, and we're going to concentrate on this paragraph here at the bottom. In fact, let's blow it up for you and look at the last sentence and say, he continued, however, attacked and set a third balloon down in flames. After that, he swung off with a town of Murvaux. Okay, we all agree on that. Flying very low. Okay, we all agree on that. He machine gunned a courtyard. I've been there more times than I can count, and there ain't no courtyard in Murvaux. There's nothing remotely resembling a courtyard. Most of you guys have researched on site in Europe too. It doesn't even have one of those little roundabouts, with a little monument. There's nothing, man. I mean, there's nothing. So that one got me. Now let's go to the second page of the same letter and continue this sentence, the same letter. The courtyard is apparently between two German barracks. Well, okay, all right, there's something to go on. It's something resembling a clue. Just behind the town, not in the town. Okay, I'll buy that. There's another clue. Killing 6 Germans, wounding some 8 or 10 more. Okay, here's the story again. Now what are we going to do with it? Well, I got to snooping around a little bit, and in order to find the answer to it, we got to back up a little bit. Remember, Murvaux was a resting place. This is where soldiers returned from the Verdun front. They had done so for 2 years, treated their wounds, went on from that point. Now, what do we know? We know that the church at Murvaux was used for a hospital. And by the way, all right, here we go. I'm proud of this. Church, 1916, 2 Germans. Church, 2005, 1 German. That's Volker Nips again. I thought that was, we found the exact spot and lined that shot up again. I thought that was the coolest thing. And he was a good sport, He was like, okay, I'm a German, I'll stand. So this church was used as the first hospital in Murvaux. Well, how do we know? Because we have photographic evidence. The interior of the church was very, very quickly overcrowded. Take a look at this little altar step, this small step right here, and these pillars over here on the right-hand side. Still there today, and that's the giveaway. And the thing is, this is one small church. When I took this photo, I actually had my back leaning over the back pew with my back against the back wall. So clearly the guy in 1918 had a much nicer, wider lens than I had in 2005. But the church is still there, and it filled up so quickly that the Germans had to find overflow space for all the guys in 1916, 1917 that were being fed into the hamburger machine that was Verdun. So they went behind the church, and I've been on top of that church, believe it or not. I've been on top of it, and that's the only way you can get this shot. I know good and well that's what they did. The church is actually out of the picture right over here, and immediately behind the church they set up a tent city. You can even see some of the crosses on top of each of these tents. So again, we have another care facility being set up in Murvaux, and it filled up very, very quickly. So what did they do? They built a bunch of wooden buildings north of town. How do we know? Because we have pictures of it. Now this is from the winter of 1917, and there's a few things to note about this. First of all, see the gables on the top of each of these wooden buildings? Secondly, you come into an empty space right over here that has 4 trees, and that empty space seems to kind of sort of be in the midst of these buildings. It's hard to tell from this. Everything's snow-covered. That's the Côte Saint-Germain, the base of it here in the background. And this was, I believe it was December 1917 is the date of this photograph. And if you take a look inside these buildings, it becomes very clear what they were doing. The worst wounded people went to the tent city. A few of them stayed in the church. Both of those were completely overflowing. Once your immediate medical care had been taken care of, to convalesce, you were sent out to all these big rows and rows and rows of new wooden buildings that were built just maybe half a kilometer on the north side of town. Again, take a look at the roof. You'll see those gables right here. All these guys here being wounded. You can see above them, there's the chart, a medical chart for each of them. So now we get to the head smacking part. I've seen this photo a million times over. And what's in this photo? Okay, can anybody Frederick Zen. Okay, let's do this all over again. How about, well, it's kind of a monument sort of thing. And it looks to me like there's a whole lot of foliage and flowers that have been planted around it with steps going up to it. And by golly, look, there's a walkway that goes right through a very nicely planted garden area with seats, fences, and a fence over here. You think that might be a courtyard? I don't know what else you're going to call it. It's even between two wooden buildings. How did I miss that? So then I start, now I'm mad at myself, and I'm scouring through all my photos as fast as I can, thinking, man, stupo number one, there's got to be another photo. If there's one, I've got hundreds of photos of Murvaux. There's got to be another one somewhere. Well, this is a close-up crop of a much, much bigger photo, and that's why it's kind of blurry, because I wanted you guys to be able to focus in on this. And what do we see here? By golly, there's 4 trees and a church in the background, and there's one wooden building, and there's another wooden building, and right between them looks to be a German monument, and looks like a courtyard to me. There's the same area today. Church steeple, Côte Saint-Germain, right here. The 4 trees, by the way, they would have been right there, and the reason they grew there is because that is Braden Creek running through town along this tree line, which places our courtyard right here in this heavy green foliage. So, you know, all we have is probabilities here. None of us, well, everybody stands up and I can prove this. I can't prove anything. All you have is probabilities. But we have really, really strong evidence for the first time ever now that Frank Luke, when he entered Murvaux, he probably did make a strafing run. He probably did kill 6 German soldiers, and he probably did wound 8 or 10 more. And unfortunately, they were probably wounded German troops who went out to see the action as a group, going to the courtyard in front of their convalescent center, and they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they got gunned down on his second pass around. So that is now reaching the point with the Frederick Zen letter, 2 photographs, and 3 contemporary original sources. Now we're getting to the point where I say, okay, I'm out of arguments. So make what you will of it, but next time he came into town, now you're looking at it from the Côte Saint-Germain. You see the M-flak shells still shooting over his head. Now, he made 2 full circles, according to everybody that left a record. He made 2 full circles over Murvaux, and then he flew off to the north. When he flew off to the north, that ran him right into the base of the Côte Saint-Germain. Well, again, he's behind German lines. The last thing he's going to do is pop up and over the thing, so he hangs a left, and he's headed to the west along the base of the Côte Saint-Germain. And the M-flaks and the flaming onions, they're still missing him. They can't depress that far. But unfortunately, the story does not have a happy ending. There was one machine gun that he didn't see. And that machine gun had a 200 to 300 foot shot, 2 to 300 yard shot, which is pretty much point blank range for a .30 caliber machine gunner who knows his stuff. It hit Frank Luke, and down he goes. Now, this is taken from the position. This photograph, I took this while I was standing on the position of the German machine gun that I believe shot down Frank Luke. Now, that machine gun was looking over the Prussian 7th Reserve artillery guns. One group of guns was here, one group of guns was to the left, and one group of guns was to the far right. How do we know? Because I went and I dug up the shells. Again, we're working on probabilities and doing the best we can. And when we went out here, we got so much going. We have had some unhappy farmers around here. That's the reason. He's a nice guy, and he kept saying, "Oh, he was like, we can't dig up anymore." I said, "We got to know where the guns were." He goes, "We already know." I said, "It's not good enough. Dig up some more." So we dig up some more, and we're running around with these rusty things. This one is actually from that pile. I selected the best one. And it got to the point where if you wanted me to find you 200 shells, no problem. You want 2,000, no problem, I can find you. Name your number and we can find them. I mean, the metal detector was going crazy. We found 3 specific locations where the shells were focused. So, we know the 7th Reserve Artillery was in town. We know they were situated at the base of the hill. And we know they had one machine gun overlooking them, and I, again, consider that pretty conclusive. So I asked the guys at the Dogfight series, I said, can you make me an animation and show me as close as you possibly can with the foliage, with the village, with everything, exactly what that gunner would have seen at the moment Frank Luke left Murvaux and headed back to the west. And once again, you know, they outdid themselves. You might as well be standing there. I've been there numerous times. And if you go, do your jogging ahead of time. The Côte Saint Germain is very, very steep. Frank Luke is hit. He takes a single bullet, goes in the right side of the chest, just below the collarbone, and the bullet exits out his back on the far, far left side, just below the left shoulder blade. Both lungs are hit, and now the clock is ticking. His lungs are going to fill up, and you may have 5 minutes, you may have 15 minutes, but you don't have many minutes. And that's the situation that he ended up in. So he immediately goes down. Whether or not the engine was hit, you hear people speculate about that all the time. Again, if I had found anything, even a shred, anything, I would have told you, I would have printed it. I didn't find anything, so I couldn't say anything. So whether or not it was hit, we'll never know. But we do know that when he gets out of the plane, he does not get out on the left side like he should. He gets out and half staggers and half falls out the right side. And we also know that when the plane stopped, it turned gently to the right because the skid was going downhill. So that's kind of weird that anybody would get out on the right side, but how do we know? Because Charles Dalive went to this little homestead called La Polygarne, which is just about a half a mile outside of Murvaux. You can see the houses of Murvaux from La Polygarne. And he went there in 1959, and Charles Dalive, most of you guys already know, he was with the 93rd Aero Squadron, survived the war. He went back in 59 to see some of those old sites, and at the very same time, he wanted to do his own little bit of research into the Frank Luke mystery. So he went to La Polygarne, and the lady of the house said, you know what, I saw the whole thing, and yeah, this is where he died, and she said that she was standing in that upstairs window. And I thought, well, you know, what's the likelihood of that being true? So how, you know, once again, how do we know? Well, I went and I asked them. Two super nice people in the, in fact, we'll go back to the previous slide. There it is, right there. There's a kitchen table. The kitchen is right behind that window right there. It's an elderly couple that live there now. You can knock on their door. Super nice people. They'll invite you in for drinks. We sat there for 45 minutes, and before we left, I said, you know what? I got to ask you this. Nobody wants to ask to go to somebody else's upstairs or bedroom or whatever, but please, you know, can I go to the upstairs window? I mean, I got my camera right here. I just flew all the way across the world to come see you guys. They said, sure, come on up. So it was kind of an amazing experience to get to see the rest of the story. And of course, Luke's death site is right there. And out to the left of the picture is where his plane landed. And you guys know the rest of the story as well as anybody in the world does. We've got, this is cool to be able, it's scary, but it's cool to be talking to the most educated people in the Western Hemisphere on World War I. And he got out of his airplane, staggered, crawled, ran, fell, staggered some more, exactly 221 yards. And the death site there, if you want to know more about that, that is accurate without, I'm going to put that 99% within 3 feet of exactly where he died. You can read the stand and find more about that. But he passed away, and that was the end of the story of Frank Luke. And it was just an incredible experience to go back to La Polygarne, to go to the upstairs window, to use your imagination and kind of let go of all the facts and figures for a few moments and just realize that I'm looking at the exact same view as the last human being who witnessed the stand, the final flight of Lieutenant Frank Luke Jr. So guys, thanks for having me out. This has been a lot of fun.